welcome to our Caregiving Essentials webinar today in January. And I don't know where you are watching this from, but in Hamilton, it is very cold here. So, as you are aware, last week we were supposed to have this, and we had a snow day in Hamilton. So now we have a cold day in Hamilton, but we're so thrilled that you are here. My name is Christine Kennedy, and on behalf of the Office of Alumni Engagement and McMaster Continuing Education, thanks for joining us today. We are so pleased to have Dr. Peter Rosenbaum. He's a medical doctor here at McMaster in the area of pediatrics to talk about a framework he co-created a number of years ago called the F words in childhood disability. I swear this is how we should think, and how these ideas can be applied to all caregivers, not just those looking after children. So we're so thrilled that he's here. But before I begin, as you are aware, we always like to start our webinars with a land acknowledgement, letting everyone know that we recognize McMaster University is located on the traditional territories of the Mississauga and Haudenosaunee Nations and within the lands protected by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Agreement. So, first, I'd like to thank Peter and Donna for joining us. And Donna, for those of you who are familiar with our webinar series, know that she is our hostess with the mostest. She's a caregiver, author, and educator. She is the author of two best-selling books on caregiving, including The Unexpected Journey of Caring. Donna also facilitates the free online courses for caregivers, Caregiving Essentials. She's the co-designer of the Creating Caregiver-Friendly Workplaces course and the co-designer and co-instructor of the Family Engagement in Research course, all of which are offered here at McMaster. And joining us today is Dr. Peter Rosenbaum. He is a medical doctor and he is also a professor in the Department of Pediatrics, and he's an associate member of the Department of Clinical Epidemiology and Biostatistics. He co-founded the award-winning CanChild Center for Childhood Disability Research, a health system-linked research unit now recognized worldwide for its research and dissemination activities. And it's because of his fantastic work. He has received an Order of Canada last year. So I think you are the one and only person I've ever met, Peter, who has an Order of Canada. So, congratulations on that. And thank you so much for joining us. I'm excited to hear what the conversation is about today.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Christine. And welcome, Peter. Oh my goodness, it's going to be such a fun conversation. And, you and I were speaking beforehand today, and I was saying, I think that the F words framework is the best thing since sliced bread for figuring out how to live with any kind of a challenge, and whose life doesn't have challenges in it. It is really a framework for figuring out how to live well in a balanced, happy kind of way. And it has the F words framework, as you say, great ideas grow up. And this idea comes from pediatric disability, and I am the mother of a son with disabilities who is now 37 years old. I cannot believe that. But we still use the F words framework in our family to figure out how we want to achieve our individual and collective goals in our family. And I'll be saying more about that a little later. But I think the best place to start, Peter, is with you telling us what are the F words, what is their origin story, and why are they so important? So you've got some slides to show us, I know.
Yeah, we can look at a few slides just very quickly and just basically to keep me on track. Otherwise, I'll just keep talking forever. As has been said, I'm a pediatrician with a career-long interest in children with developmental disabilities and their families. And if we just click the next slide, our ideas have evolved from traditional thinking, which I'll describe, to the way we're thinking now. So I've worked with kids with cerebral palsy and Down syndrome and autism and so on. Next, please. And traditionally, we've had a sense of futility because we can't fix them. And the ugly truth about medicine is we actually don't fix very much of anything, but we can help people live more fuller and more fulfilling lives, even in the face of conditions like this. Next, please. So people have often said, "What can you do for them?" And if they make the mistake of asking me, they get an hour-long answer, which you will not get this morning. Next, please. What we have evolved over years is to recognize that there are other ways of thinking about health. And if we go to the next slide, I'll show you just briefly where we've come from and what has changed in the world around us. And we always think it's important to start with this because when you hear that something's new, you can easily roll your eyes and say, well, there they go again. It's like the latest update on my computer or something. But there's some fundamental changes in our thinking, or expansions, perhaps is a better way of saying it. Next, please. So in my field, the traditional thinking about children with developmental disabilities is we need a diagnosis, we need a medical understanding of what's going on, and that is necessary but not sufficient. When we have the diagnosis, we can find the treatment, which is absolutely essential for me when I have suddenly have chest pain, and I need to find out, or you need to help me find out if my chest pain is from my heart or from digestive problem or from anxiety, because the treatments for those specific diagnoses are specific to the diagnoses. Um, and because we work with children, our notion about rehabilitation is to help them uh, function normally. And rehabilitation, again, is extremely important. After I have a stroke, I want people to help me return as close as possible to what I could do before, based on the history of what I could do and based on what I'm most interested in doing. But in children, normal function is an elusive goal. And we've also been trained traditionally that service providers are experts. And so our beliefs traditionally are that experts make diagnoses, treat, and fix things. Next, please. Um, an expansion of these ideas is subsumed in phrases like this, that health is the ability to adapt and self-manage in the face of social, physical, and emotional challenges. In other words, health is more than just not needing to have glasses and a hearing aid like I do, or use a wheelchair or whatever. This is a much broader notion of health than the traditional biomedical notion, and functioning, however it's done, regardless of ability, can be understood as evidence of health. If you can do what you want to do, and the people listening today are doing that from a wheelchair or with hearing aids or with visual aids, if you're here and able to engage, then that is an example of health. Next, please. In our field, the medical reason for a child to have autism or cerebral palsy or learning disabilities is important, but these are not diseases in themselves. There's something going on in the body that is interfering with functioning. But developmental disabilities, which have fancy names, as you see in the second bullet here, these are labels, these are descriptions. They're not diagnoses as such. And if we think that way, we recognize, among other things, what these conditions have in common, the impact that these conditions have on children's development, the impact that they have on their family, the impact they have on the community in terms of education, recreation, and support to develop into an adult with these conditions. Next, please. And so thinking non-categorically, thinking beyond the category of diagnosis, allows us to see that there are many common issues that affect kids and families, and that we can address much more thoughtfully than just being concerned with the medical part. We also recognize, and it took me a very long time to realize, that the children I saw with developmental conditions grow up and become adults with those conditions. And the adult world has not traditionally been very kind to people who used to be children with cerebral palsy or Down syndrome or autism. And we are increasingly, as a community in general, accepting and celebrating diversity and variation. Certainly north of the border, we are. Sadly, in other countries, this is more of a problem. And so our whole thinking has been challenged to go beyond the traditional futility of trying to fix things we can't fix. Next, please. Um, and what we are promoting today, and I'm going to talk about our F words very briefly, is there are a number of basic assumptions that have always been there under our noses that we haven't paid attention to. The centrality of family. I have been a pediatrician for well over 50 years. I have never, ever seen a child come into clinic on their own and ask for help because their behavior sucks or they don't talk good. They come in with people called parents. Family is the central unit of our interest. And I think this is an essential statement of the obvious that isn't sadly acted on as well as it could be. We have to value the variations in functioning and not be so strict on what's so-called normal. We need to focus on child and family development because children, even children with developmental impairments, they grow, they learn, they become different people every day. And we haven't paid enough attention to the development part of things. I spoke briefly about the life course perspective that we need to have so that we're investing our energies not only in promoting today's functioning and development, but recognizing that these things are going to be important for children and families as they grow. And so our ecological thinking of child in family in community and putting that into action becomes extremely important. Next, please. The World Health Organization dipped its toe into the waters of disability in 1980 with a framework that you see in orange that essentially said that diseases produce impairments, problems in the body, which in turn interfere with activity and cause disability, which in turn have social consequences called handicap. So impairment, disability, and handicap was the language that was being used in the 1980s through to 2001 when, click, please, the next slide. These ideas were reviewed and enhanced with what the World Health Organization called the ICF, the International Classification of Functioning, Disability, and Health. And this is the change in language, I think, is important because now we're recognizing that functioning is important, that disability is now, as you'll see, a social idea, and that health is actually important. So this ICF framework is now a framework for health, and it is on this framework that we have built the F words. Next, please. So this is the ICF framework. And you see that any health condition, because I'm a pediatrician, I put cerebral palsy and autism spectrum disorder at the top. But if this was if we were talking about seniors and aging like me, we might put macular degeneration or Alzheimer's disease or other conditions that affect adults. The basic notion is that any health condition at the top has something going on in body function and structure. And that is what we try to diagnose. These conditions, any condition, basically shows up with problems in activity, in doing things. I used to be able to do them better, now I can't, and so on. The brilliance of this framework is in the notion of participation. Participation in the World Health Organization's language is engagement in life in ways that are meaningful to you, however you do it and regardless of your health condition and any restrictions in activity. At the bottom are the environmental factors or the contextual factors. And again, it's embarrassing to talk about these things because they're so obvious. My father used to ask me why we needed research for this because to him it was so obvious. And I'll say a little bit more about my mother's situation and how my father dealt with it. The personal factors are what makes you, as a person with this condition, a unique individual, not just the gallbladder in bed 3, which is how I was trained in medical school. And environmental factors are obviously hugely important. And they are not only the weather and the cost of healthcare, but the immediate environment particularly of children. And that's where family becomes so important. So I'm putting all of these ideas together, and particularly, as you note, by connecting the hip bone to the thigh bone, by connecting all of these ideas to each other, we recognize that an intervention at the level of the environment may have big impacts on what you can do and on your ability to participate, and perhaps even on body function and structure. So, one example, we've got a child with cerebral palsy who has mobility problems. The environmental intervention might be a wheelchair, which allows that child to be much more active, which allows them then to get into mischief, which allows them to participate with their friends, which maybe motivates them to do more of their physical activity to improve body function and structure. Next, please. So the F words were our cute, if you like, and I say cute in quotations, effort to bring these ideas to life in the context of children. But as Donna said at the beginning, these ideas are now, as you'll see, being used much more widely than just children. So when we talk about body function and structure, we talk about fitness and we talk about physical well-being and mental health. We're paying attention to those things. When we talk about activity, we're interested in functioning, doing things. Life is about doing stuff. And however it's done is less important than the ability or the opportunity to do it. With respect to participation, because we're interested particularly in children, we talked about friendships, and these may be peer relationships, but also relationships with the adults in your environment, with pets, with other people who are important to you to develop the social aspect of who you are as a person. Personal factors, we emphasize fun because if we can know what's fun for a child, we can exploit that interest and engage them in ways that we might think are therapeutic, but the child is doing it because it's fun for them. So building on their interest is essential. And then, as I said a minute ago, with respect to environment, family, the nuclear and extended family is the essential environment in which children grow up. Environment is much bigger than that. And then as kids get to school age, it includes school, it includes community, it includes recreational resources, and so on. But this is the essential set of ideas, which importantly for people who are hearing this for the first time, are all grounded in the World Health Organization's framework. Now, my colleague Jan Willem and I added the word future. It's not in the ICF. We added it to remind people, because we work with children and families, that children are constantly changing and developing. And so are families. And so future reminds people that this whole business is a work in progress. Next, please. And this is one of many ways in which these ideas are integrated. The bigger boxes are our F words, the smaller boxes are the ICF framework that you've just seen. The cartoons have been translated, as have the words, into many, many languages. So the cartoons are culturally adapted by people in different countries to reflect the activities that kids do, the dress and other things that people look so that it looks familiar to people. And these ideas are now being used all over the world. Next, please. And as I said, future is in there to remind people that this is all an evolving story. I think the last slide shows this. Next, please. You see that these ideas have been adapted and adopted by colleagues who work with adults. They're all the same ideas. How we address them may be different. But what this F words approach and an F words framework does is allow people to see the whole person and not just the condition. And the personal example I'll give is my mother sadly had Alzheimer's, which was recognized when my parents had their 50th wedding anniversary. My mother then lived for another 11 years, deteriorating to a shell of herself, and was in a very good facility in Montreal. And my dad had the good sense on his own, using his own imagination, to put a lot of her drawing. My mother was a very good artist, and a lot of her drawings were on the wall in walls in her room to try to help the people who worked with my mother see that she had been a whole person and that there was more than a piece of meat in a bed. And the F words framework, however it is displayed, and we have dozens of ways of doing that, allows us to see the whole person and not just their predicament. I think that's all of my slides.
Peter, thank
Oh,
you so
sorry.
much.
Just
Oh,
sorry, just one more thing.
yeah.
The F words are not an assessment. There's no score. We don't want to get rid of professionals. We don't want to get rid of therapies. What we do want to do is challenge people to think about the impact of the efforts on the lives of kids and families. We want to increase the role of families and their voices, families' goals and values, not what I think you should be doing as therapy, but trying to help you exploit your child's best abilities in the context of what you want and seeing the child in the context of family and environment. And we know we have lots of evidence these ideas are being used very, very widely. The paper has been downloaded over 100,000 times around the world, and there are at least 35 translations of these ideas. And so we're trying to, quite frankly, change the world by expanding our awareness of these ideas so that they include what we know to work and be best approaches, but make it much bigger with respect to families' values and voices. And I think that's all.
Hmm. Thank you so much. That was such a great sort of quick explanation of exactly what I asked you to do, which was to describe the origin story of the F word and talk about their impact. And what strikes me is that for me personally, as a caregiver for our son, Nicholas, who has cerebral palsy and um, he is a very, very charismatic. If you looked at him and you looked at the list of his needs that require 20, his abilities were, but the F words gives us as a family and him the the notion of possibility within each of the F word domains. So, for example, when he was little, and we did this intuitively as a family and before we were aware of the F words, and I sent you a slide deck, Peter, of showing how we did things as a family over the years. And I'm remembering when Nicholas's sister up at the cottage at our lake was learning to water ski. Rite of passage at a Canadian cottage, everybody learns to water ski. And Nick said, I want to water ski. Well, I think the first thing was, oh my goodness, okay. We never wanted to say no to anything you wanted to do. We just have to figure out how the heck is that going to work? So we got a windsurf board, and my husband sat on the board. I was driving the boat. My husband had Nicholas in front of him, of course, with a life preserver, holding for dear life Nicholas. They're both sitting down on the board, and my husband is holding a ski rope and holding on to Nicholas too. And Nick says, well, he's not speaking, but he was like, go, go. And so I did. And we went around the lake, and Nicholas is trying to lift his arm to say, go faster. It was hilarious, but I think, and then the other thing that comes to mind, because we talk about all ages and all abilities with this framework, and, you know, the key thing for me personally in the F words is the idea of possibility and personal choice. The key being what is meaningful for the person. So, my mother also lived in Montreal, and she lived in a smallish Victorian home, assisted living, right on at Lake of Two Mountains. So the house where she lived was right on the water. And she had dementia for about the last 10 years of her life. And she died in 2018 at the age of 96. And I visited her very often. And I would sit by the water with her. And she said, "You know what I really want to do? I want to get in the canoe," because she loved that. And I went, "Yeah, Mom. Hmm." She was very frail. There was no way she could get into a canoe. But my sister and I dreamed up maybe there is a boat service that is accessible that would tour you around. And guess what? There was. And we got Mom onto the boat and she said, "I want to tell that driver where to go," because my mother always wanted to be in charge because she didn't want to be passive in her activities. So we sat her up and she started giving orders to the driver, which he thought was funny. And he's following orders or saying, "No, we're going to crash if we go over there," whatever. She felt she was having a meaningful
Mhm.
activity that addressed, I'm going to say, every one of those um, F words for her, because it even gave her the idea that if she could do that, she could do something else in the future, even.
Mhm.
So that's what I want to talk about here is this general idea of meaning and purpose and possibility. And I think, you and I were talking the other day after our initial date got canceled because of a snow day, and we had a chat anyway. And I said to you, I think many caregivers, and speaking as a parent of a child with a very significant disability, multiple disabilities, often we think that our own needs don't matter because we're caring for someone who whose function, whose diagnosis can often equal suffering, um, and progressive loss. Um, it can mean uh, that that person's needs subsume everybody else's needs in the family. And I wonder what if you could say a few words, Peter, about how the F words can be an equalizer if everybody does their own F words and has a think about what. So if I have a child with disability, yes, of course, those are his F words, but I might have some too.
And many families that we work with, first of all, I have to say, we at CanChild, we work with some absolutely sensational parents who have come forward and wanted to be part of what we do. And I know you know some of them.
Yes.
But we hear this also from other parents we haven't met before who not only have created an F words picture of one sort or another, and I'll tell you in a minute where you can find ideas about this. They've done that for their child, but in some families, everybody has done an F words profile, which I'm told is very therapeutic because it encourages people to think about what's important to them with respect to fitness, functioning, fun, and so on. And then people can look at how their particular individual F words profile or story as it is today, and it may be different next week. How does that blend with or contrast with or conflict with other people's needs? One of the things that is hardest, I think, for anybody who's a caregiver, whether you're a parent of a child or whether you're an adult with a an aging parent or partner, one of the hardest things is to look after yourself. And I have in the course of my career as a pediatrician often asked parents, "How are you doing?" And the answer usually is, I'm fine, don't worry about me.
Mhm.
And I like to tease, and so I say, well, yeah, actually, I'm a kid's doctor. I don't really care much about adults, but how you're doing is important for your child. So let me ask you again, how are you doing? And in a sense, and this is a corny way to say it, we have to give people in caregiving roles the permission to be interested in their well-being because it's important. At a minimum, it's important for their role. And if they're burned out or tired or sore with a sore back or so on, they can't do their job well. And so it's almost a seduction to try to get people to say, yeah, I could use a bit of help. Most of us like to be independent and don't want to do that. But the focus on family and the focus on the many roles we have allows people to see that it's okay to be interested in yourself. It's not being selfish to be interested in your well-being because it will allow you to be a more functional and more stable caregiver.
Yeah, it's so true. I mean, I think the analogy, well, with the one we hear all the time, which I'm sort of so tired of, is, put your own oxygen mask on first. But, the other, I think, better analogy is that we wouldn't expect our phone, if it was dead, to work. Your phone dies and it has no more energy to be able to make a call or send a text. And I think that's something that we need to plug in. Um, and I think that, we receive, excuse me, we receive questions from people who register for this webinar. And the first question that came in from someone who is maybe here today is taking care of oneself as a caregiver selfish? And I think, you've addressed that, but I think it is a trap that we all tend to fall into. At, every time I address a need of my own, I am turning away from a need that I could be meeting of the person that I am caring for. And I think in order to address that misconception, because I think it's a misconception, as you said, our well-being in families is so tied to the well-being of each other. And I was thinking that in families, and I don't know what you think of this idea, but I think of there's a researcher, Jeffrey McCrossan. I don't know if you know Jeff,
No, Jeff.
who
Yeah.
does family lens
Yep.
of
Yep.
childhood disability. He looks at everything through the lens of the whole family, including grandparents, like everybody in the family. And I think, I wonder if that um, notion that if I pay attention and do my own F words, that means a betrayal of some kind to my child or to my mother, whoever it is I'm caring for. Could, do you know whether anybody has ever done the F words and stated some goals under each of the F word domain, thinking together as a family for fun, we would like to have a day out where we're not thinking about anything but having fun. That's our goal.
Yep. Yeah, we've heard that.
You have.
We've heard, yeah, people doing that. I was thinking and reflecting on on the notion of selfish. If I do something that is just for me, and if I mean, I just had lunch and it was fine, and it was just for me. It was with my wife, but it wasn't at somebody else's expense. But if there was just enough food for one and I took it all for two, if two people and one lunch and I took it all, that would be selfish because it would be at the expense of somebody else. And maybe we need a way to think about to distinguish between selfish, as in self-interested, only for me and potentially at the expense of other people, versus looking after myself as part of what you're describing, which is the system. And if I get better sleep, I will be a better partner, parent, caregiver, worker, whatever. And so it's not selfish to want to have a decent sleep. if it's going to enhance the roles I play, as opposed to stealing everything because it's just for me because I'm so important. And we have a model
Yeah.
of that in the White House.
But I think what, like, as you brought us through the evolution of the F words from the International Classification of Function, suddenly we're framing these ideas as health.
Mhm.
So
Yes, yes, yes.
maybe that's really good to say this. Why would you feel guilty about wanting to be healthy in your role as a caregiver?
That's a
You know?
very insightful comment. Thank you.
Yeah. So, so I did my F words, um, and I shared them with Nicholas because we were doing his for this process, which adults with disabilities go through in the province of Ontario called person-centered planning or um, a personal development plan. And you make goals for the next 12 months. This is what's important to me. What's got to happen to make that happen? Um, it's a very, it's a deep dive into personal aspirations, and they all fall under the F words domain. So some of them are functional. Some of it says that you need to do range of motion exercises to make sure you don't, get
Mhm.
all
Mhm.
stiff in your body. And we'll put that there on paper, and everybody, his helpers are going to do that. It goes into his care plan. So this is a formalized way, but it also says, well, it said that he wanted to go to the World Cup football in Toronto, but we couldn't pay $4,000 for ticket. So now we switched that up to going to a local pub for the World Cup, but he also is getting a Canada jersey. That's in there too. So I said to him, Nicholas, you have all these goals,
Mhm.
your F words goals. We're putting them into your person-centered plan. And this is all going to happen because we sign on the dotted line. We will all commit. Everybody who cares for and about you will commit to these goals and making them happen. So it's not fake, it's real. And I said, now, Nicholas, look at my goals. I really care about exercise. So I want to talk to you about fitness. And I do a yoga class online every day. Now, I need you not to phone me during that hour. Do you think you can do that? Oh, yeah. Yes, Mom. So,
I would make the observation that is so evident, and yet I hadn't thought about it this way, that a good deal of what we're talking about is control,
oh,
control
it
over one's
is.
life.
It is.
I can't do very much, but these are the things I want to do. So
Yeah.
if I can do them, that's my, those are my goals. That's my life. And the loss of control of whatever, in whatever sphere, and I'm not talking about Nicholas or you or me, but all of us, the loss of control becomes an extremely important aspect of suffering. We suffer because we
Oh,
don't have
oh.
control.
And I cannot act. Yeah. Um, it's so true. And so I think the other way that we can think about the F words is that they enable control for a person who is receiving care
Yeah,
because you're giving them a responsibility to help you
exactly.
reach your objectives to be healthy.
Yes.
And that is profound. I mean, like your dad said, Peter, this is so obvious. Why would we even be talking about it? But all of a sudden, these normal conventions of how we are in families, they get blown up when somebody
Yeah.
um, gets a diagnosis of cancer or disability or whatever it is, and all eyes are on the patient. So, and then it's everything gets weird. And so yeah, I think we could think about the good in this framework for the people who are receiving care to be able to feel purposeful and feel like they are in control of helping their caregivers and their family members being to be healthy. And we have some lovely comments. Um, and I'm just rereading them. Um, and I will mention the McMaster open courses and modules regarding caregiving, including the template for a care plan. That's from Joy. And in Caregiving Essentials, we have um, care planning tools and resources. There's so much there. It's free. You get a McMaster micro credential for going through this online course in your own time. So the link is there to Caregiving Essentials. And another of our listeners today wrote, when I took time to go to weekly choir rehearsal, went to an exercise class, or get an overdue haircut, that helped me continue my care of my 92 plus father and raising three teenage boys for the last 3 years since COVID cooled off. I was accused of being selfish, but it was survival for me, and I confidently state that. And, you know, this makes me think that um, I very often present the F words as a transformational tool for family caregivers, regardless of whom they're caring for, any age or ability or disease group, whatever. And I think I've thought a lot about how could you take your F words and share them with people, like your doctor, like your social worker. But I'm thinking, if I were presented with a so-called friend or relative who said I was selfish because I was going to get my hair cut or I was going to acquire practice, I might just hand them my F words template and ask them, how would you like to help me achieve my health goals? And then watch their face.
Yeah. Um, the these ways of thinking, I think, are, as I said right at the beginning and have emphasized, they're an expansion on where we've traditionally been. And these ideas are often developed particularly by people who are able-bodied and whose lives are ordinary. And I live an ordinary life, and hooray. One of the things I neglected to say is that the between 1980, when the World Health Organization published its original framework, and 2001, when it revised it, was that the revisions included the voices and perspectives of a lot of people with disabilities from the so-called disability community. And I think that was profoundly important. I don't know how it came about, but it must certainly have enhanced the perspectives of the people who did not experience these issues, to hear how these issues play out in the lives of people whose function is different. And having different function doesn't mean less function. It means different. I am happily a friend of David Lepofsky, who's a
Mhm.
famous disability advocate. David's been blind since he was a child, and among his many qualities is a tremendous sense of humor, an enormous ability to cope and manage in the face of his impairment, which he describes us as the light dependent people.
Mhm.
And this is an example of David's witty view of the world. And, we just take it for granted. And so when the lights are out, we're in difficulty. And he tells the story of he was a prosecutor in the Ontario Superior Court, and he was prosecuting a case, and suddenly there was a great kerfuffle, And he turned to his junior and he said, "What happened?" And the junior said, "All the lights went out." And David stood up and said, "Your Honor, we're ready to continue."
Good for him.
And, seize the moment to remind people that there are people with capabilities that you, light dependent people, don't have.
Hmm.
So a good deal of this is a matter of, dare I say it, perspective.
Absolutely. Everything you see depends on your perspective. Um, Peter, we have a really very interesting question in the Q&A. Um, how would you handle how would you handle it when not all family members see any purpose with providing possibilities, meaning, and purpose for a loved one? Are there any resources to inform and educate? Now, I have some ideas about this, but I'd love to hear yours. Is there some way that the F words could address this blind spot that some people have with disability and or a catastrophic head injury or spinal cord injury, and it becomes a catastrophe with devoid of possibility? What do we do about that?
Yeah, I'm not sure I can answer with respect to the F words as such. I can imagine having conversations with people, both in a group, to listen to the various perspectives, and with the people who are struggling the most because they are clearly suffering from the loss of somebody who was who they were yesterday before their head injury or their serious illness, and would try to understand what it is that they find most distressing and perhaps talk about how to frame the potential to do something that would be meaningful for the person who they've lost in being replaced by somebody else who is now a damaged individual in that sense. Um, I don't know that the F word, I mean, the F word's an approach that said, here's how we think about people. Tell me who your child was or your mate, your partner was before the accident. Let's think about the equivalent of an F word's profile to know who they were and to think about what was and is important to them, what was important to them and what's important to you, so we could potentially frame our approach to the next steps of their lives. Uh,
But you must come across, I mean, maybe you do, maybe I'm thinking you must come across some families learning again from the childhood disability experience. You must come across some families who come to you and say, well, you're not going to be able to help us. There's nothing that can be done for my child.
yep,
My child is hopeless.
yep. And sadly, sometimes they say that because they've been told that by people who, and I like to say that the doctors are really, we love to predict, and we're not very good at it. And the other reality, besides the fact that we're not good at predicting, is the children never listen. And children who weren't supposed to walk and talk are going to university. With young children, I talk about our limited ability to predict, about the plasticity and adaptability of the young brain, and the importance of experience to help the wiring as opposed to the rewiring that I need after my stroke, which is probably much more limited. Um, and also to recognize that how people are experiencing this in the moment is the reaction of the moment. And let's have another conversation about this tomorrow, next week. Let's keep the options open for now, because you, as the individual, stressed and distressed and suffering, may come to a further understanding on your own. There also may be changes in the situation that give you some encouragement. We can't replace the person that's been lost. We can't fix some of the things that are broken, but we can learn how to respect that person and honor that person. And again, by knowing who they were before they got here to the emergency room or the ICU, and I'm having conversations with my colleagues in the ICU at their request about this, we can see who the person is that is the whole person and not just the case and the diagnosis.
Yeah.
It's easy to say all of that, and it's harder to do, but it's also not an event, it's a process.
Yeah. And the other thing is, I just never have met anybody who didn't have possibility within their F words domain. Any human, I've never met a person who did not have possibility within those domains. I have met people whose ideas of what constitutes moral personhood and valuable function, they will not accept anything outside of their own fixed ideas of what a person should be
Yep.
and and should do.
Yep.
And those people, even if they're in my family, to answer Joy's question in the Q&A, I would avoid them because
Too short.
yeah, I mean, I might have a conversation, but not about uh, my loved one, my child, or whomever it is in my family, that I believe I have a different conception of success for that person. And I am constantly seeking possibility within that person's abilities, where we are and what we have to contribute, whatever, be it money, energy, friends, family, community. What's at my community center? What's at my church? How can we help uh, do some of these goals that are meaningful to us? Thank you very much. Meaningful to my
Person.
son, my mother, and maybe not to you. But I think, it's so funny if you think about normal, healthy, able-bodied people. I've made choices in my life where my friends went, "What are you crazy? Like, what are you doing that for? Why aren't you doing this other thing that I I think you should be doing?" And I would just say, well, you know,
There's an
so
expression, there's an expression that says if you take other people's advice, you make their mistakes.
oh,
Um,
that's good.
I think it's important to recognize that typically developing kids can make choices that their parents don't agree with, or that parents can be disappointed because their child only became a this instead of a that. And the parent
Yes.
had some image of their child and what direction. And this is, I'm not talking about people with disabilities, I'm talking about ordinary kids who weren't good at math and therefore didn't do whatever it was that
Yeah.
their parent thought they were going to be an engineer, but they weren't good at math and didn't want to be an engineer, but they became something else. And if they have a fulfilled life on their own terms, that may be disappointing to the parents, but that's the parents' problem and not the child's.
That is a perfect place for us to end today because it tells us that we are all human and that these goals of health apply to us all, and that we are the people individually and in the family to assess their worth, and
Yep.
they are worthy if we say so.
Yep.
So. Peter, thank you so much for a very, very rich conversation. And I'm so glad the chat is so active. People are really responding to
Oh,
these ideas and we'll bring them home and I hope use them. So
thank you.
thank you very, very much.
So the people who raised the issues too.
And again, congratulations on your Order of Canada.
Thank you very much.
Christine, over to you.
Thanks, Donna. When we were discussing, um, as everyone on this Zoom can imagine, Donna sort of comes up with these ideas, and Donna really wanted this one for January because, in January we like to set goals, not resolutions, but we like to set goals. And I think today's talk really helps remind people. We talked a lot about the self-care, that as a caregiver, you need to look after yourself first because your energy is then put into the energy of the person that you're looking after. And this idea that we need to change sort of how we think, this can be a goal for everyone for 2026. And this was the talk that will help inspire you with that goal. So thank you, Peter, for talking to us. It was wonderful. And now I understand why you received the Order of Canada. So maybe we'll just put up the slide. So we have our next talk in a few weeks, and that is on February 9th. We have Mark coming to talk about family meetings that work, strengthening communication for care and life transitions. And it's interesting, we were talking today about how we need to have good communications with the people in our network to ensure that, the person we're looking after, that their needs are looked after through the F word frameworks, but that our own needs are looked after too. So hopefully the conversation will continue with Mark next month. So thank you everyone for joining us, and we look forward to having you join us again. Once you leave the Zoom, a little survey will pop up, and we would be very appreciative if you could fill that out for us. Thanks so much. Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Donna. Take care, everyone, and stay warm. Unless you're in Vancouver, where apparently it's not too cold. Chilly, but really probably like 0, not -30 with the wind chill. Take care. Thanks, everyone.